Well, after Strange New Worlds did that parody of Star Trek episode that pissed whoever's left watching Secret Hideout Trek these days, they had a run of 3 episodes that certainly weren't great. Weren't really even good, I wouldn't say. But they were episodes that tried. And you kind of, sort of, especially like the first of them with the, the archaeological episode they did, had something of sci-fi concept. Then you had the Captain Kirk episode, which it was just very basic, and you had this business of them having to do a rescue mission with the 2 ships and all that. But then you had this ridiculous Skeletor giant skull monster ship there. And then, the twist ending was supposed to be, But a lot of the episodes can tend to be offensive here and there and how bad they are. But these, and that one was just sort of all right, but nowhere near, what they would need to turn it around, and it's not happening. But nevertheless, it's not an episode that I think is one to get overly pissed off about. So that's a plus for for the run of these episodes. So it was something interesting. I mean, it's teasing Kirk and all that, and then they made a big deal about, oh, look, the future characters are together. It's like their first mission together and all this sort of thing. Of course, I no longer judge these as breaking canon, because they're not. They're not canon. This is an alternate timeline, and I don't know why anyone misses that, especially when they pretty much established that in Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. And then, of course, Lower Decks did its episode. So, there. Done with that. If your approach to it is that it's really bad towards canon, at this point, I think that's just not... It's not an argument to be made anymore. But whatever. Then the next one was the found footage episode, which probably, and once this season's over, I think there's only 3 episodes left or something like that. This one might be the best one they did. It's the approach to it, because of Uhura's boyfriend, Beto, his name is, of his attitude was so anti-Starfleet, and kind of, he was it was just blatant. He'd already made his conclusion before he does his quote-unquote reporting. Well, that's pretty typical in quote-unquote journalism these days. So it was an odd take, from where it was, because his assessment of Starfleet and calling it a fascist organization or conquerors or whatever, that kind of thing, he was wrong, and it does display this. And then at the end, you get them gushing about what Starfleet means to them and all that. And still lackluster in comparison to Real Trek, but overall, it was somewhat interesting to have that take coming out of this crowd, and all of that. So a run of 3 consecutive episodes where there wasn't this blatant insulting stumble, other than the usual CW level soap opera shenanigans and stupidity that the show has overall. But beyond that, there wasn't really a whole lot there that was the usual, just like eye rolling, to kick you right out of the show. Well, it's hard to get into the show, but you know what I mean. It's just not that much of an episode that pisses one off for the usual reasons of a Secret Hideout product. So, hey, could you get another one after those 3? No, you could not. Right back to the stupid, so badly stupid. And it's another episode that they're trying to be funny, and I just can't do it. Yes, there were comedic episodes of classic Star Trek, Next Generations, so on. They did do that. There were comedies in there. So it's not really wrong of them to do it. It's just they don't have the capability of it, and they don't have the execution. Now, as I said, I don't really bother with them violating canon anymore because I don't see it as canon. And of course, like I said, the alternate timeline thing fits, and that's that. But that doesn't explain or forgive everything. They have never gotten the Vulcans right. So they do this Vulcan episode referencing a previous episode where Spock was turned into a human being. And so they get in this situation where they need Vulcans to deal with this society that is descended of Vulcans, but they don't have warp technology and all this sort of stuff. And so they can't reveal themselves to them because of Prime Directive. However, they do possess some technological abilities. They would be able to detect human officers disguised as Vulcans. So they got to actually become Vulcans. So they do the reverse, turn humans into Vulcans. You saw the teaser before the season even opened. They really thought this was really funny and cool, and this would really interest people. This is easily one of their worst episodes. They've had some bad ones. That Trelane episode and all that, really awful. But this one's right in league with that. It's just so stupid, and it comes from this concept that the devotion to pure logic is something congenital. It's within their DNA. It's not. It's a philosophy. It's all spelled out through Trek that the Vulcans were once, hyper emotional. They were a very hyper violent race, with their passions and whatnot. And they nearly destroyed themselves until this philosophy that's more akin to a religion for them, turned the tide and saved their race. So they became very passionately devoted to the philosophy of pure logic. And over time, that has been the way they are, because emotions are something they don't deal with very well, as what happened in their past with their ancestors. So that's what it is. It's not this physical thing, although over time you can see it. There's like the episode of the Spores where Spock was being forced to give in to his emotions, and it was painful for him at first and all that. But nevertheless, that's what it is. Here, just by adopting the appearance through this genetic, magic that they inject them with, they suddenly take on the entire personality of Vulcans without all that, being descended from however many years of ancestors who developed this philosophy, ingrained into them, brought up and raised in it, practice it, what have you. No, it's instantaneous, to the point that they believe they're superior to Spock because he's only half Vulcan, which is absurd, because the idea of Spock being turned into a human was because his human DNA was there. So the idiocy that any of the rest of them would consider themselves full Vulcan because of this treatment, well, it's just physically impossible, because they're all human beings. So they're in the same boat that Spock was in when he switched to human. So right off the bat, that was, if they wanted to do this thing where Spock is feeling bullied by his own people, they could have done a story where some Vulcans came along and this played out, whatever. But it's just an on the ship episode, so you don't actually see them go to the planet. I mean, you see them beam, you get out of the transporter, but you don't see them on the planet. They do it very quickly because they're so efficient. They saved the people and they're back. Problem is, for some reason, they couldn't figure out how to turn them back. The usual way just didn't work, so they got to figure that out. So the rest of the show delves with that, but the rest of it is just these comedic shenanigans about the Enterprise crew. So Uhura, Chapel, Pike, and Lady Khan Lon are Vulcans. And they're complete assholes. They're rude. They break off relationships. Chapel breaks up with her fiance and all this stuff. On and on and on. And along the way, things are revealed. So we find out that number one, they need to find this Vulcan expert on the Katra as a means by which they can kickstart the restoration of their humanity or what have you. And just when things couldn't get any worse, this Vulcan is played by Patton Oswalt. So he shows up, and we find out that number one and he were once married, but they keep splitting up, but they can't keep their hands off of each other. They're just so hot and heavy and horny for one another. So giggle tee-hee, and like number one is so excited when she sees him, and it's just little squat fat Patton Oswalt. So see, it's hilarious. So, and that's all there is to that. And stupid shenanigans about that and this. And then Uhura basically mind melds her boyfriend to get him to obey her or some crap. I mean, so I guess that makes up for him betraying her to get the story in the previous episode. So now they both did bad to one another, so there's still going to be a couple at the end, you know. So that's about it. Lon is the one last to go, so Spock's got to enter her Katra to convince her to go back to being human. And they fight, and then they dance, and then they fight, and then they dance. And isn't that how a relationship between a man and a woman is? Yeah. So she collapses and melts in his arms and wants to be human again. Yay. So it was terrible. It was a terrible episode, really stupid. And that's about it. So they're back to form. I think 3 episodes that were interesting in just how less stupid they were. But don't worry, the stupid came back in force with this idiot, Vulcan episode, which it isn't even Vulcan. They don't even understand that. And that was obvious from the get-go when they brought in Spock's wife and all that stuff. Because, you see, alternate timeline. Okay, yeah, alternate timeline, all the canon breaking things they've done top to bottom all over the place. But alternate timeline is not going to explain the entire Vulcan race being rewritten into something else. It's just not, Certain people might never have existed, sure. But then none of them would if you had an alternate timeline where I don't even know the Federation would exist. And they, tomorrow, they did that, But an entire race, and their whole philosophy, but it's something else, that it was some genetically ingrained thing in them, and that's why they are the way they are. They watch enough of Star Trek to get some of the decorations and to make fun of it and to steal stuff here and there while stealing from other sci-fi franchises and stuff. So it was a bad episode. And so there you go. But, they had, albeit a very stumbled role for a while, but it appears it's over. Now there's a couple of more episodes. We'll see, but that was probably as good as it's gonna get.